Hello, welcome back. This is episode 34 of The Lockdown, the final episode. Now, technically, it's episode 36 because there was 2 bonus episodes, but hey, who's counting? Now, first off, the whole premise, the idea behind the lockdown and the practical side of privacy and security, and you've heard me say this many times, is that it's not about all or nothing. If I've convinced just one person, although I've had people write in, so I know there are many more, but one person to switch to Graphene OS, or perhaps use a password manager and 2-factor authentication that they hadn't used before, then that alone is a huge win. There are so many people that I've spoken to that just give up because it seems like attaining extreme levels of privacy is such a high bar to attain, so they don't do anything. A great example of this, and I'll touch more on this in a moment, is at the airport. You see at the security check-in desk, there's a camera. Face the camera, and then you can walk on through. But people don't want to be seen as the odd one out, or weird, or strange, by saying, no, I don't want to use the camera. I do. I don't care if I look strange or weird. I am weird. But the majority want to fit in. They don't want to be seen as the odd one out. So what do? They just face the camera and walk on through. Now you may think this is harmless. They have your picture anyway. It's on the passport. But what if that technology is combined with Clearview? Clearview is a private organisation that's been around for a very long time, scraping our pictures off social media accounts, for example. I've heard reports of ICE agents using that on their mobile phones. The fact it's on their mobile phones, are these government-issued devices? Are they personal iPhones? This is where it's heading, and this is where it concerns me. But through the past 34, 36 episodes, I really think my job is done. We've talked about self-hosting. We've talked about Graphene OS. And I think what's really made the difference is listener stories, your listener questions, your feedback to the show. But the all-or-nothing approach cannot be overstated. Threat modelling is unique and personal to every one of you. Now, my threat model, as someone that's working in the security industry, is very different to, say, a victim of abuse, or someone that's in foster care, or maybe someone that has been thrust into the limelight due to a scandal at the company they work for, maybe the company they own, maybe they're an actress, maybe they're a neighbour of a murder that happened. Whatever the situation, there are many examples where overnight something could change. So it's about doing something. We've seen so many examples in the past where people have been wrongly accused or even false positives talking about facial recognition. This is not just the US, by the way. This is all over the world. London at the moment has these facial recognition cameras everywhere. Well, false positives do happen. So we want to control what's out there. Now, I'll talk more about that in a moment. But why is this the final episode? I've decided to redirect my energy on other projects. We all have the same amount of time. I even say there is no time. There's only now. But what we choose to do with it is determined by our jobs, family, and various other commitments. As you know, I travel a lot with my day job, and I love that because I get to meet new people and hear new perspectives. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff I'm working on which I won't share here because it's nothing to do with privacy and security. But they are the projects that I want to really focus my energy on. So first, I want to say to everyone that has supported the show, thank you. It means a lot to have your feedback to show when I'm on the right path or sometimes when I'm not. Now, as listeners, you owe me nothing. You are just here to enjoy the show, or not in some cases. But for those of you that have supported me on Patreon, I am very grateful for that. Now, am I walking away from privacy and security? No, absolutely not. A big part of this is just focusing on my involvement in privacy and security in the business world. So the cybersecurity.com website isn't going anywhere. In fact, I had a listener question just yesterday when I was thinking about recording this episode, asking why I don't have privacy tools listed on the website. Now, to that person that wrote in, thank you for that. You are not the first to ask that. So I decided I will add all the privacy tools that I have mentioned over all the episodes. So if you go to cybersecurity.com podcast.com/privacy tools, you will see a list of everything I've mentioned with a link to that particular episode. I want to be very clear. I am not advocating or recommending any of those tools. They just happen to be the ones that I use and that work for me. Because as I said earlier, everyone's threat model is different. If you are a journalist, and I'm not talking about the US, it could be anywhere in the world, and you're being targeted by the government or some group, most of those privacy tools are not going to be enough for you. Simply running Little Snitch on a Mac and installing Signal, I don't think would be secure enough. That device could still be compromised. The use of Graphene OS could be a recommendation, but you'd use it in a very different way to the rest of us. Now, some time ago, I had a listener email me, and he said that he was a professor at a university, and he was very concerned because the university website has his bio and his profile picture on there. And I said to him, listen, you just have to type my name in a search engine, and you will find my picture, but it's controlling what's out there. I'm on YouTube videos. If you go to the About page of my website, there is my picture. But that's because I've decided that's the picture I want people to see, and that's my professional representation because that is the line of work I have chosen to be in. Now, if you are in a position where you don't need your picture online, then get rid of it. I think it's too late for me. My picture's been out there for so long because I've been working for various tech companies over the last, certainly the last 10 years in the US. So doing lots of public talks, videos, having my picture featured in blogs and articles, it's out there. Now, am I saying you can't get rid of it? Absolutely not. You could start that work right now. If you don't need your picture, you could start efforts to take that down. It's not always going to be easy, but it is possible. But again, just because we can't attain levels of extreme privacy doesn't mean we should just give up. I also chose to do this podcast. So someone could easily take this audio and clone my voice. That's a risk I was willing to take. And really that's what cybersecurity is all about, is assessing the risks, not eliminating them entirely, but mitigating them as best you can. And I'm sure for those of you that work in cybersecurity, this is just the basics for you. But for those that aren't, there's a concept called the CIA triad. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, if you imagine that as a triangle and you put a little ball in there, you can slide that ball around as much as you like, but you cannot achieve 100% in all three areas. Even if you were to bury your self-hosted infrastructure under 100 feet of concrete and disconnect the power, well, I'd say that's pretty secure. But it's not 100% because now you have no availability. You can't access it. You get my point. But I think sometimes the privacy community can be quite harsh and critical of others. Now, there's someone I know that works in the cybersecurity industry. He owns his own company. He does reverse engineering of malware. He works with ransomware pretty much on a daily basis. Far more knowledgeable than me on malware and the internals, for example. But you can Google his name and find his address online. That doesn't diminish his experience in cybersecurity. It just means he hasn't put the focus on privacy. It's an interesting paradox, isn't it? Someone that's so skilled in the security industry, but has done very little to take their information down from public resources. If you're not married and you don't have kids, and you can afford to buy a cabin in the mountains or in some rural area with no HOA, you can put it into a trust, then great. You're doing far better than I could ever do. If you have a wife or husband and kids, family, other commitments, you have a day job, perhaps like the professor that is teaching every day, his bio picture is on the university website, then I would just say this, relax, just do what you can do. It doesn't mean give up on things like Graphene OS, compartmentalizing your phone numbers with MySudo and having aliases. It doesn't mean you don't have a trust to protect your home address from public records. It doesn't mean not using a UPS store. You can do all those other things as well. There's no such thing as 100%. Not if you want to lead a normal life or as close to normal as possible. But that is just my opinion. And you are free to agree or disagree. Anyway, I will leave you with that and say farewell as it's the last episode, but leave you with the rest of this final episode. Now, since the last episode, which was about a month ago now, almost coming up a month, I've been able to spend some time outside. I really like the autumn or the fall. I don't like the word fall. It reminds me of maybe the fall of civilization or something like that. But no, it wasn't that. I was just spending time outside and enjoying the cooler weather. And with that, I've been doing some outdoor jobs as well. And you can really blame that for giving me the time alone and the time to think about where to take the show. But talking about time and space and all of that, I wrote an article on my website, and it's called The Space Between. Now, I thought I'd mention it here. It's more cybersecurity related, but with a philosophical twist to it. And really what it's addressing is some of the gaps we have in cybersecurity. Now, I used this Japanese, if you look on the blog post, you'll see the Japanese artwork. It's kanji that's pronounced as ma, but it literally means the space between and the relationship between things. So think about cybersecurity. There's something called the cyber kill chain. Lockheed Martin developed that years ago. So it starts with reconnaissance, moves through to weaponization, delivery, but ends on actions on objectives. And the idea of that is, when you're undergoing a cyber attack, what stage are you at? Is the attacker doing reconnaissance on you? Are they actively delivering malware? Are they gained command and control? And it's discrete steps to help you understand your defenses and how you're prepared for those defenses. But isn't that also a problem? If I was to ask you, where does social engineering fit on the cyber kill chain? Is it reconnaissance? Well, certainly a big part of it is the threat actor, the bad guy. They're going to be doing their research and reconnaissance. One of the reasons we're in privacy, we want to control what's out there on us. Or is it weaponization? What about delivery? Maybe they've sent a phishing email. And the truth of the matter is, it's really somewhere in between all of those things. Now, this Japanese concept that I picked up really as the theme of my blog post is quite apt here. I like it. I'm a big fan of Japanese culture. If you imagine, you may have seen these Japanese gardens where it's gravel raked in a nice pattern, and there's a rock over there and a rock over here, and that's about it. And the whole idea of that art is not that the fact there's rocks in the middle of this gravel or raked stone garden, but it's the space between that matters. What on earth has this got to do with privacy and security, I hear you ask? Well, in cybersecurity, we are just focusing on each step. But as a privacy community, we're actually already ahead of the game with compartmentalizing our identities and communication channels. Now, let's say you're a well-traveled privacy practitioner. You have email aliases and you've separated identities. If you get a phishing email, supposedly from your bank, to your, maybe to your company email address, but your private email address at work, well, that will immediately flag as suspicious because you don't receive banking emails on that identity, on that form of communication. I actually had an Apple SMS scam, smishing attack as they call it, just the other day. It said, thank you for your order of the iPhone 17 Pro Max. Well, this came through to one of my alias virtual numbers in my sudo. And I actually call this alias Angela Moss. And if you know who that is, that's a fictitious character from the TV show Mr. Robot. And sometimes I have fun when I get messages on there. So I just responded saying, yay, can't wait to get my new phone. I never got a reply after that. But in there was a phone number, which I assume is going to get through to some Indian call center and they're going to scam me. And there was also a link, which was certainly not apple.com. But in the organization, at work, we only have one communication channel, pretty much for email anyway. That's first@company.com or whatever email format your company uses, which is crazy because that's the email the security team will send security awareness training requirements to. You must complete your security awareness training. If you deal with third-party suppliers, which is a huge risk in cybersecurity, these third-party supply chain attacks, well, they also land in that same inbox. You may get a meeting request from your boss. Guess where it comes through to? The same email identity, that same inbox. And it really is crazy. Like for this podcast, you can email me at this show, lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. But if I get an email saying, this is from Apple, this is from your bank or whatever, it's immediately nonsense. It doesn't make sense. But I'm also hearing more and more about this UK digital ID system. And I know I talked about that in the previous show, but it really does have me more concerned the more I hear about it. Here's the problem. If you are the bad guy, is this going to stop you? Are you going to think, oh, I've got to present my digital ID. I better not do that. They're going to know who I am. No, you are going to compromise someone else's ID. It's as simple as that. When this digital ID system is rolled out, we are going to see a huge, widespread campaign of social engineering and phishing and manipulating this new digital ID system. And especially with more elderly people that aren't as tech savvy, they're going to go, oh, I need to click on that. I need to validate this. This is going to be a nightmare. I don't know what they're expecting it to prevent. I think there's something about immigrants to the UK. And literally, as I record this very episode, I've just had an email from a listener with the name of Fred. So let's assume that's your real name, saying, just listen to episode 33. Did I know that in Switzerland, we just voted for an electronic ID or EID, similar to what is currently put in place in England? He says, we refused 2 or 3 years ago a first iteration of the law, mostly because the management was intended to be given to private organisations. The law has been revised in favour of a state-managed system, which was accepted by just over, it says 50.59% of the population. Wow, that's pretty close there. The debates were very animated and the privacy concerns were real. It's optional for now, but we all know where it's going. And he provides a link to the government website talking about this EID. And it just says a state-recognised electronic identification system, or EID, will allow the Swiss population to prove their identity online using a digital instrument. I can think of an instrument or two that could prove our identity, but anyway, that's another topic. Both administrative procedures and transactions with companies will be carried out without the need to switch from paper to IT and vice versa. Bear in mind, I'm having to use a translator to translate this, so it might not be word for word what was intended, but you get the gist. This is going to save individuals and administrative services and companies an unnecessary amount of time. I think it's almost as if they are already preparing us with these small breadcrumbs that lead to this. I was in a coffee shop yesterday. I was travelling. I wanted to do some work. Now, I went to pay for my coffee and they presented me with this Square payment terminal by Square. Now, luckily in this case, I was actually able to type my card number in, so I used a privacy card. And it was funny because I got a text message to one of my alias phone numbers confirming the payment. So you can see how they're tracking your phone number and everything else. Now, obviously, in my case, it's aliases, no harm done. But this is still digital tracking that's happening here in the US. The whole tap to pay situation with our phones, which, by the way, I don't use. First off, I can't really use it. I use Graphene OS. I don't have a Google account logged in on there. But if you have an iPhone or Google phone, I would avoid tap to pay altogether because it's just another step to where you are, what you're paying for, tracking our habits and so on. And we're really giving up our convenience so they can do just that, and that's track us. Now, I do have tap to pay on my credit card, so I do use that, and that's in my real name, and that's a risk that I'm willing to take. But where possible, I will enter a privacy.com card. Now, back to the article I wrote called The Space Between. One of the things I mentioned in there was this NPM breach. Now, if you heard about that, it's in the news recently. NPM, there's basically a whole bunch of modules for Node.js. And one of the maintainers, this guy called Josh, received an email and he thought it was from the NPM help team. It was npmjs.help was the address it came from. That should have been .com. The problem, we can dissect that one. First off, has he just got one email address? I'm assuming he's not got multiple aliases, because if I receive any email like that, the first thing I'm looking at is where did it come to? I don't care where it looks like it came from, but it's where it came to is the first thing I'm looking at. And this is where the compartmentalization of our communication channels really helps. I have a unique domain, an email alias for GitHub. I have a unique one for banking, different domain names. I've talked about this lots in the past, but this is why. Because now if you've segmented all those identities, and by the way, I use Fastmail, I use ProtonMail, I use Simple Login. So it's a combination of all those things as well as custom domains. Now, as an attacker, that reconnaissance has really stepped up another level. You've got to figure out, what email address do I use for that service? Perhaps if there's a data breach on that service, you're going to get the email address that way. So it's not fail safe, but I think this goes a long way. But this got me thinking, and this is really where I'm alluding to in the article, is organizations out there are suffering from ransomware attacks and data breaches on almost a daily basis. So why then are they using first at companyname.com, for example? It's predictable. All the eggs are in one basket. A big part of social engineering is based on, there's a guy called Robert Cialdini, I think that's how you pronounce it. He done this psychology of persuasion. And there's things like urgency, authority, reciprocity. Now, if I adapt that model, looking at how Josh, the NPM package maintainer, was targeted, the email, and I've got a screenshot of that email, by the way, on the blog. The email says, if you don't take action, in 2 days, you will be locked out. So there's the urgency. Timing. There was actually an interview with him on YouTube where he talks about how it came through on a busy day. I assume it was a Monday morning, something like that. So he was already very busy. He thought it was genuine, so he just wanted to get it out of the way. So he reset, or thought he was resetting, his two-factor authentication. There's also social proof, probably not in this case, but when social engineering and phishing emails are targeting someone, it might say, you are one of 4 employees remaining that haven't taken this action. This will be escalated to your boss if you do not take action today, that kind of thing, which leads to authority. They always have this authoritative part of it. So the email has come from the official NPM support team, or from your boss, from law enforcement, from government, that type of thing. Now, really, what all these things are trying to do is make us act with haste. Get it out of the way. We think it's legit, it looks fine, it must be real. But so the space in between, and the reason I use that title, is we also sometimes need space to think. There's a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman, and he is the one that came up with System 1 and System 2 of the brain. System 1 is you're driving your car, a dog runs out in front of you, you slam your brakes on. Very quick, decisive action. System 2 is maybe you're choosing between 2 different savings accounts. You're not going to be making such a hastily quick decision on that. You're going to spend perhaps a few days, a few weeks on that decision. The psychology behind all these social engineering campaigns is manipulate System 1, get them to act quick. So urgency, authority, social proof, all of those things. And back to our organizations that we work for and these companies that are just getting attacked. Despite spending billions a year on cybersecurity, they still end up in data breaches. Our data is being leaked. It's because they're completely neglecting this, I'd say, reconnaissance phase, but also the space in between, the compartmentalization of communications channels. Let's say you work in finance. One more analogy here. If you got an email to your personal email address, if you use Gmail, for example, I know none of us do, but let's say you did, and it said you've got to pay this invoice for one of your customers, well, this would immediately flag as suspicious, because why was that sent to a personal Gmail account? It's the wrong communications channel. Now, I do like my analogies, and I was trying to think of one for this and trying to liken it to, imagine having a box where you renew your passport, it goes in the box. You get a birthday card from a friend or family member, goes in the box. You get your payslip from work, goes in the box. And just having a single box for everything. But then I thought, this is actually a really stupid analogy, because in the United States, we have a mailbox, one box outside the house. Now, coming from the UK, this was very strange for me, because we have letterboxes. It's on the door. So if someone puts mail through that letterbox, it's now inside your home, not left outside. Now, I know there's federal law and people aren't supposed to tamper with it, but this is why I don't have anything sent in my real name to my house, because I just assume that some crazy person is going to steal my mail and steal my identity or whatever it is. Now, I was actually quite pleased to hear from a family member the other day that said they've deleted all of their social media accounts. I was taken back. I honestly didn't expect them to do that, and they did. And for that, kudos to them. Now, I can't claim credit for that. They literally took their own decision to do that. It was of no influence by me. But obviously, I've helped them in how to do it properly. Now, in previous episodes, I obviously mentioned privacy.com. I'm happy to report it's still going strong for me, despite my own anxiety about getting locked out due to that family member. And by the way, I'm not sure if I told you this, but they have got their account back. It was lots of back and forth with the support team, but finally they got their account back and they're happily using it again. And this leads on to some listener questions. Now, the first question was asking about privacy.com, but why I didn't mention my sudo. As a good catch, I didn't mention my sudo, did I? Now, the primary reason being is my sudo virtual cards do not work on Graphene OS. So I assume that's Android. So it's not Android, it's iOS only. That's one reason. So I would need a separate device just for the virtual cards. I do have an iPad. I'm assuming I could use it on there. I haven't tried it, but that was one reason. The other one, there is a service fee. I believe it's 2.99%, or it certainly was last time I checked. It's not a huge amount, but it's a consideration depending on how much you want to spend with it. The other one, though, is when you go onto an iOS device and go to sign up, the first thing it will ask you for is your government ID. Now, I was lucky. When I set privacy.com up all those years ago, I didn't need my ID. I currently have it linked to my bank card. I don't use Plaid, or I have done in the past, but currently it's linked to a bank card. And as far as I recall, I never have given them my government ID. So that for me is a huge win. Now, of course, they know who I am. They have access to my bank details, but they don't have a copy of that ID. Problem as well with my sudo, and this has nothing to do with virtual cards, this is just a problem in general, is if you're using Graphene OS, then there's no way of backing it up, not reliably anyway. My sudo relies on the device backup. So let's say you're on stock Android, with Google accounts. You can back up to Google, and that's a way of recovering. You still need a recovery password, I believe, but that's how you recover. With iOS, you either back up to iCloud or iTunes, but either way, you need a backup of the device. The alternative, which is what I do, is having that secondary device. In my case, it's an iPad, and the reason being is you cannot pay for my sudo, for the subscription on Graphene OS, not unless you're logged into Google, and then that defeats the object. So I have an iPad, which is offline most of the time. It's in airplane mode. When I need it, I go in there. I can manage my subscription. It's backed up. I actually back it up to iTunes, but that's also a backup as a secondary device. So if I lost my Graphene OS phone, it's not the end of the world. I can get another phone, and then you can scan the QR code from the iPad app, and then you're good to go. Now, I know I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but perhaps I should have mentioned my sudo. I will revisit it again. I'm still a bit nervous about giving my ID because at the moment, I use my sudo for alias phone numbers. I would probably be more inclined to do it if they had a separate virtual card app and then it was separate from that account. Okay, another question here on self-hosting. Someone said, what's your self-hosting setup? What else? You mentioned PhotoPrism in a previous episode. Not much has changed from what I run. I'll be honest, Nextcloud has been probably the most significant self-hosting service that I run. I don't run it on a VPS, so that's a virtual private server, so nothing like DigitalOcean or Linode, because I don't see the point of running something like Nextcloud in the cloud, because that's still someone else managing the physical server. They have access to the data on those disks, and safeguarding that just becomes a little trickier. I run a server at home. You can run this on Docker. In fact, on my website, there's a blog which goes into immense detail on how to set this up, and it's really not as difficult as you would think. But the reason it's been such a lifesaver for me is, number one, it allows me to synchronize my notes. So I use Obsidian, I use Markdown for my notes all the time. They're just saved in a folder called Notes on my laptop or my desktop. Nextcloud syncs them. It's as simple as that. As I've mentioned before, the app for Graphene OS, and I assume iPhone, is terrible. There's no decent integration with Nextcloud for the Obsidian app. So I just use the Nextcloud client app on the phone if I need to view a note. It's not ideal. If I'm out and about and need to take notes, I'll be honest, the best way for me is using Note to Self within Signal, and then I copy it into my Notes app on my laptop. I just wish there was a better Obsidian app with Nextcloud Web DAV integration. Anyway, I digress a bit, but for the notes, it's great. But the other reason is to sync my KeyPass database. KeePass is essentially a bunch of database files. It's worth mentioning that I do separate databases. I have a main one, but I have other ones for business and various other reasons. I don't want too many, and for the majority of you, I'd say 2 would probably be enough. And I'd have one as your password database. The other one, if you choose to use it for that, is for one-time passwords. I don't combine that into one database. I think that defeats the object. So I have a separate database called TOTP with a separate password, and then accounts in there are purely to generate my one-time password tokens when I need access. I've completely migrated away from Authy. It'd be interesting to find out what you use. Any of you listeners out there, so please let me know. I'm curious to know if you use KeePass like I do, or you have another solution. But separating those databases is key. Now, sure, they're both on my device, but I think this is where how you use your device and what you install on there and just your daily habits really makes a difference. Now, if I could, and I've said this before, I would run Linux as my day-to-day desktop OS. I just can't. I have too many apps that are either Windows only or Mac only, so I do switch between the two. If you can get away with running Linux, then great, go for it. But again, this is more the practical side of privacy. I'm not spending every day on a System 76 laptop that I'm booting with Tails and I put a blanket over my head like Edward Snowden. That's not where I'm coming from. I still need to have my day-to-day business and all the things I do. Recording this show, I use Ableton Live, for example. That's where I do all my editing, the post-processing for the sound. I use it because I've used that for years, but I can only use a Windows machine or Mac for that. But then I use both Little Snitch on Mac or Simple Wall on Windows. I prefer to have that per process firewall. So every program that tries to access the internet, I have to specifically allow. I like that. I think that's the best way forward. When I use my Mac, I'm not signed in to any Apple account whatsoever, and I have Little Snitch running. It's not going to be fail-safe. I'm sure there's ways they can bypass that, and there's a deeper technical discussion we could have there, but I'm going to save that for another time. But to be honest, for the practical privacy point of view, I'm significantly lowering a risk there. And just really my habits. I'm not downloading pirated video games that could have malware in it and installing that on my Mac. And for those that don't know, I was actually talking about this with a friend the other day. I worked out I was 11 years old, coming up 12 maybe. This is going to age me a bit, when I discovered the cracking scene for video games. Now, this was the days of the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST. And they were the good old days indeed. So in England, there was a cracking group called the Pompey Pirates. If anyone has heard of them, feel free to drop me a note and we can reminisce. They were called that because there was a town on the south coast of England called Portsmouth. They're between Brighton and Southampton, if you know roughly where that is. And the nickname for Portsmouth is Pompey, and they were called the Pompey Pirates. So I assume that's where they come from. And there was another group called the Medway Boys. I think or Medway Brothers is one of the two. They were also a game cracking group, primarily focused on the Atari ST, I believe, in the mid 80s. So yeah, that's now why am I talking about that? I've gone off on a tangent again. That's right, malware. So if you know what you're doing and you want to pirate games, then that's a conversation we should have over a coffee at Black Hat or something like that. Not for this show. So I'm going to move on. And back to self-hosting, I wouldn't go overboard with it either. Nextcloud has been great for me. On top of that, I use Jellyfin. I think that's an amazing media player. I love it. I'm a huge fan. Been running that for years. What else do I run? Photo Prism. I run that in a Docker container. And that was purely so I could give access to my family members some photos. But with any of it, it's not exposed to the internet. That's a key point. So when I leave the house, I can still get to my password database because KeePass DX has a cached offline version. When I take pictures with my phone, it can't back up to Nextcloud until I get back home on Wi-Fi. So it works and it's great. Friends and family, they use Bitwarden. I'm certainly not going to expect them to run Nextcloud. Now, as with Graphene OS, I had another email on that and I've already responded. So thank you to you for the questions you had and the praise for the show. So I had one listener say, am I going to be able to install apps such as my banking app, or is it really restricted? I think they thought there was some curated list of apps that Graphene OS provide, and it's doesn't even look like a normal phone, and that's not the case. Most people that see me using my phone, they would not know it's running Graphene OS. Okay, final question for today. A listener emailed and asked about mobile Wi-Fi hotspots. Do I use any? Do I use them? What brands would I recommend? No, I don't. As you know, I do travel a lot. I don't need to use mobile hotspots. Honestly, I believe tethering to your Graphene OS device is actually the best option. If you're using your Graphene OS phone to connect to Wi-Fi networks, then it does a great job with MAC randomization and all that kind of stuff. But if I want to connect my laptop, for example, let's say I'm in an airport or hotel, I will not use public Wi-Fi. I will just tether to my phone. And for me, carrying around another device with a SIM card in it, I don't know, something just makes me a bit nervous. I don't know the OS of that device. It's just unnecessary. And if anyone's got any compelling arguments why I should do so, then do let me know. And that ends the lockdown, the Practical Privacy and Security podcast. That's it. Now, listen, I really do appreciate all of you that have supported me on Patreon or just sent me an email to say you're enjoying the show. For the Patreon members, feel free to cancel. You don't have to keep paying. If you do, then I will continue using that money to buy my coffees. Now, remember, cybersecurity.com isn't changing. My focus on privacy isn't changing. It's just this show. So, my OSINT, Defense and Security Framework, ODSF, is something I believe very strongly about. I'll be attending many cybersecurity conferences, and OSINT ones too. And I'm still putting a lot of my focus on the enterprise, which is really where ODSF sits in. It's not a framework you would really put in as an individual. There may be some things in there that you can pick up on, but my focus is on organizations and enterprises and cybersecurity as well as privacy. But I'm still here for emails, so you can still email me, lockdownpodcast@protonmail.com. Privacy Tools is now live. It's under the Tools menu. If you also go to cybersecure.com/privacy tools, I've curated a list of all the tools that I've used and mentioned in the show since it started, along with links to the actual episode, so feel free to check that out. So I still want to hear from you. I'd like to know what you're up to, what challenges in privacy you are encountering, any tips, techniques, that kind of thing. And as for me, on my to-do list is to review my Graphene OS apps that are installed and my setup. Just some digital hygiene, I suppose. And you should do this too. I'm going to be looking at my user profiles on Graphene OS. I have one for banking. And by the way, it's probably worth mentioning why I do that. Separating user profiles on Graphene OS is actually quite important. If I was talking on my phone in the middle of New York City or London, wherever I am, and someone snatched the phone out of my hand, they won't be able to access my online banking apps. That's in a separate profile. One could argue, should you have banking apps on your phone at all? I've been on and off with that over the years, but currently I do. Secondly, can they get to my email? No, because I'm using Proton Mail and I've set a PIN. If you go into the settings of Proton Mail on your phone, you can set a PIN, so they can't open that without the secondary PIN number. And this is why, again, I'm going on about compartmentalization, separating all these identities, separate apps. So on my list is just some digital hygiene. Check what I've got installed where. And over the coming weeks, as usual, I'm going to be traveling a lot. I will be in Canada, I'll be in Seattle, I'll be in San Francisco, and unless there's some surprise client meeting, I have no international trips planned. But hey, you never know, I might end up back in the UK for whatever reason this side of Christmas. So please stay in touch. There is still the Matrix community. You can download Element, you can join that. The show notes has the links for all the different rooms. Introduce yourself in the introduction room. There's a general room and there's one on the podcast itself. I will keep that going as long as possible. However, If that starts turning a bit toxic and silly, I will end up just shutting the whole thing down. At the moment, as I speak, it's really, really good. There are a lot of active participants. I think over 135 members have joined that, and there's some really engaging discussion. And I'm surprised, very pleasantly surprised, that all of you in there are from various parts of the world. It's not just the US. And now it's time for me to shop for masks. What do you think? Old Man or Keanu Reeves?
No drinking, no drugs, no kissing, no tattoos, no piercings, no ritual animal slaughters of any kind. Oh, God, I'm giving them ideas.